everybody, and welcome back to the Simply Human YouTube channel and podcast. Hello, Karen.
Hello, Christina, and hello, everybody.
Today, we are going to be continuing an extension of exploring boundaries and looking at what we call boundary busters. We're going to focus on the boundary buster of fitting in and talk about how this comes into conflict with the intention we might be setting to have healthy boundaries. And you may not have really stopped to think about the connection between that drive to fit in and what's going on with your boundaries. We're going to be talking about what we mean by fitting in. We want to bring awareness to that connection, and we want to provide examples of how this might be playing out in life, discuss the emotional and psychological costs of trying to fit in, and then talk about some strategies that can help you overcome that anxiety and that instinct to fit in and remind you, like, this is what I need. And I really want to have these healthy boundaries. And I'm going to feel that discomfort. So here are my tools that I could use to help me be successful.
And Christina, I want to add here too that I feel as though when we were preparing for this and I was thinking more about it, is this is so much aligned to my coping mechanism for imposter syndrome. Fitting in was so huge in driving it. So I was always trying to indicate about what other people expected making assumptions, driving this as well. It's the timing of it is perfect because it ties into all the other ones that we've had around imposter syndrome, about assumptions. So I'm very excited about diving more into this because some of the things that we talk about, I wish I knew earlier, or at least had the ability to hear about this so I could just notice more.
Yeah, I absolutely agree. When I was putting together this outline, the connection with imposter syndrome, like this is just going to that next level because the desire to fit in, it isn't everything that's imposter syndrome, but it definitely can be a part of it. So this is going to that deeper level.
Yeah.
And we wanted to share a little bit of the research for those of you who are feeling maybe like you're the only one who is dealing with this struggle. There was a study by the consulting firm Deloitte Consulting. In this study, what they found is 61% of people admitted to not revealing their true selves. 61.
I know. That's amazing. It makes me feel so much better. Seriously.
Yeah, I was absolutely shocked. Basically, that's more than half of us are admitting to what they use the word covering. And
That's
I
like
think,
masking, right?
yeah,
That's
I think more
masking.
common, we
It's
kind of
like
hear it.
being an
And,
actor,
yeah, it's
not being
masking.
yourself. Yeah.
And this is that they're admitting to putting on a mask or covering up who they are in order to conform to the mainstream. And this, when we think about fitting in, for some reason, I do hear this more as a therapist to be a struggle with women because our brains are actually a little bit more wired with social awareness. So the sensitivity to how we're fitting in within the group does tend to be a little bit more intense for women. But according to this study, 45% of straight white cisgender men also reported they engage in covering or masking or by playing a role of what they think it means to be a man or to fit in with their male group. And this study was back in 2017, so it wasn't that long ago.
Well, is it similar to like when I was growing up, right? Or I don't say when growing up, like 16, men don't cry.
Yeah.
Right. I mean, that used to be the whole thing. If you're a man, you don't cry. And then how much you stifle that in because you're some men, the way they're wired is they have that emotions. I mean, there's some men that are very empathetic and you just feel that energy. You feel that. It's the same thing where there's so many assumptions that we're making about what men should be, what women should be, so forth and so on. And those are societal assumptions in many ways, which just allows us to quote unquote fit in.
Yeah, well, let's go a little bit more into the definition. What do we mean by fitting in? And so I'm going to use the definition that, again, Dr. Brene Brown, we talk about Brene Brown quite a bit because I am just a big
We
fan of
both.
her work. Yeah. Well, I'm a nerd. So what I appreciate is that her work is research based and she does tons and tons of interviews to collect people's stories and their experiences, and then she analyzes it. So when she talks about fitting in, and this is from her book, The Gifts of Imperfection, she said, fitting in is about assessing a situation and becoming who you need to be accepted. Belonging, on the other hand, doesn't require us to change who we are. It requires us to be who we are. And she goes on to say, ironically, fitting in is the greatest barrier to belonging because we're not really being ourselves.
And I think, to me, I want to take a pause here for a second, because to me, this kind of slapped me in the face when I first heard it, when I read the book. And then now when you bring it up again, because it feels counterintuitive, because I'm fitting in so they don't get kicked out of the tribe. What is the tribe that I'm trying to belong to?
Mhm.
Because it's not my tribe. The
Mhm.
tribe that is more akin to who I really am. Fitting in is about when your brain works so fast that you assess the situation and you become who you need to be accepted. It's almost like you just become a chameleon or an actor on stage to address whatever you need to be. Now, belonging doesn't require anything. I mean, belonging just requires us to show up as we truly, truly are. And I think that's what I love about it, because belonging is something where you just be where you are and you trust. That's the
Mhm.
whole point, that you have to trust and be discomfortable to realize that your people will come, that you'll have your best friendships ever. And you may not even know why. And it is because of that.
Yeah, and I'll share a little bit more of my story
Mhm.
as we go along, because one of the things of being late diagnosed with Asperger's is or autism is that my brain doesn't quite have the same social wiring for social norms and social communication that neurotypical brains have. And fitting in, wow, that just wasn't really in the cards for me. So all I had to do, because I didn't understand how to observe and how to read and identify, oh, this is the norm. I'm supposed to wear this. Like that would make no sense to me. Or I should like this music. I mean, well, I don't like that music. Why would I say I like that music? This is how my brain works. This concept just didn't really land for me. So all I could do was show up as myself, and I feel so blessed because in my life I have gathered these amazing human beings, like Karen is one of them, but these friends who accepted me for who I was, and these friendships that are like 35-year long friendships. Now, one of them's lifelong, is my friend who lived up the street from me. We're still friends to this day, and I've never had to be anyone other than who I was, and I feel really blessed to have, in some ways, for better or worse. Now, before I understood about the autism, I will admit I had a tremendous amount of social anxiety because I didn't fit in and I didn't understand why. And I didn't know that there was something I was supposed to do to actually fit in. But in this point in my life, I feel like I was spared, and understanding what the psychological impact of the habit of trying to fit in is actually, it's pretty damaging. It could cause anxiety, depression, and we'll go into that. But I did want to talk a little bit first about, so why in general, say neurotypicals, why is there a drive to fit in?
Because we're wired that way.
We're wired that way. And Karen mentioned, right, we're social beings. So humans, think about human beings. We're actually pretty fragile compared to other animals, other mammals. We don't have a thick hide. We don't have exoskeleton shells protecting us. We walk around with all our organs exposed in front of us. We're actually pretty fragile. And so learning to live in groups and protective groups was part of our survival. So we've evolved to depend on other people. So in our brain is a hardwiring and awareness that if we're not part of a group and we're out there alone in the wilderness, we're gonna be some animal's lunch. So,
Yeah. I just had this image of me, like I am actually going in to fit in. So I wear the same clothes that everybody else is. So then no one can say that I'm different from the outside. A lot of the stuff I'm doing is on the outside.
Oh,
It's not on the inside. It's all what I'm cloaking, right? Or what I like when you mask, it's on the outside. What clothes I wear, what voice I use, what words I use. It's very interesting to me, but it doesn't really. And then all of a sudden, I'm discomfort because it's not aligning to who I really am.
right.
And so I'm holding in this. And then I get so fearful I'm going to say the wrong word because that's not really who I am. And then it's like triple anxiety, right? Because
Yeah.
I've done the outside part, but now I'm worried about the inside part, so I'm saying more silent in everything. So I'm silence who I am too. So, and it gave me a double trip. I really do believe part of the fitting in and the imposter syndrome is, that's what gave me what I told you earlier, a long time, well, not a long time ago, when we first started our podcast about, I went to 98 pounds. I think it was all related to that chronic stress and everything about trying to fit in, trying to be fitting in
Mm,
all the time. I lost who I really was.
yeah.
So,
Well, this makes me think about, there are certainly groups in this country who have, by societal pressure, have been forced to mask. Back
mhm,
in the
mhm,
90s, if you were gay or lesbian, there was actually a policy, don't ask, don't tell.
yep.
I mean, it was an institutionalized policy to mask and cover. And, with what we understand now about the toll on mental health, and you kind of think like, holy, that was a policy. So, and there's still groups today that feel that they have good reason to say, yeah, it isn't safe.
Mhm.
Mhm. So, we're not trying to say that, oh, if you're masking, you're doing something wrong. But what we just want to talk about is be aware, be intentional, understand the toll it's taking. If you don't need to be engaging in it, understand it might be automatically happening and there's a toll to your mental health. But for people who you have assessed the environment and your safety does depend on it, then the goal would be like you want to be working on a strategy to find that clan, find where you can be safe, those places and those spaces where you feel safe to be who you are. Because for our mental health, we all have to be able to, if we can, live most of our lives just being who we are. I did want to mention one more study about this urge to fit in, and this
Mhm.
is by Professor of Psychology, Dr. Geoffrey Cohen, and he's from Stanford University. And he just commented on the fundamental concern about belonging to a larger group, being accepted in that group, and having something to contribute to that group motivates much of our day to day thoughts, feelings, and actions. So I thought this part was also interesting because he's expanding fitting in isn't just
Mhm.
like, isn't limited to what Karen said about it
Clothes and
being
stuff.
just the external, like, we may even feel the need to engage in certain behaviors that says, "See, I'm one of you." What Karen was saying was right. It's like what you really feel inside is gonna be different, but it's the mask, it's what you say, it's what you do, and the need to feel that you are actually being part of and contributing to this group to fit in, and the problem is when it doesn't really align with who you are. There are many reasons why we are sort of sensitive to this besides our hardwiring. There's also cultural influences. So, Karen, we've talked a little bit about Chinese culture, where your parents had put an emphasis on assimilation, right? And
Yeah, I mean, I think that's where I felt as though we had to fit in. We'd always say yes to things. We were talking about earlier about the last episode that we did. Well, people pleasers. I felt like we're always saying yes to everything just so we could fit in. We never would say no. I think the simulation where honestly, you'd asked me this earlier. I don't know if I ever felt like being Chinese. I think I'm so interested in fitting in. But it was very interesting because I remember I was asked on a date by another Asian and I said no. And it's because I didn't want to be associated with the other Asian.
Ah,
Yes, when I think about that. And I think I apologized to him earlier. I don't forget. I don't remember if I did it, but I think I did because I remember doing that. I remember thinking that I didn't want to be seen as another Asian going with an Asian and classified. And so I said no. And I think I dated non-Asians for always. I even married a non-Asian, right? I married a Caucasian. And I married for the right reason. It wasn't because I truly did fall in love with Mark. So let's just be very clear on that one. In case he ever listens to this podcast, I did pick you solely because we were soulmates, not because. But my whole point of it is there was this hard pressure in our family. And it wasn't, I didn't feel like I really felt it was a simulation. A simulation is when you're fitting in. It's not
Yes,
trying
that's
to
what it is.
belong. It is truly, I always think back to the Star Trek, when you have to, there's a Star Trek
Oh,
character in
oh,
there, right?
the
The Borg.
board, the
Yeah,
board.
yeah. I always think of the Borg.
So for you folks who may not be Star Trek fans, in Star Trek: The Next Generation, there was a alien species called the Borg, and it was a hive mind, kind of like bees, and they would go around the universe annihilating planets and assimilating, and you would just get sucked up and turned into another Borg that had no mind of its own and just worked like not autonomously, but in sync with the group. It is a really good metaphor for the most extreme of assimilation. So let's talk about some other things. There are other aspects of it, like American culture. There's a lot in American culture and capitalism that we get messages all the time about what clothes we should be wearing, what car we should be, how white our teeth should be, what laundry detergent, you should have. We're getting told all the time what we have to do to fit in. And now with social media, where thumbs up means like you're fitting in and thumbs down is, you're going to be in the out group. There's a lot more pressure on. So I just saw something recently about how design, like home design, like our aesthetic is starting to get limited because of seeing certain aesthetics that gets forwarded by the algorithm on Instagram and other social media, that we all unconsciously start to be like, oh, that's what beautiful is, and we're losing that sense of diversity. So social media, capitalist culture. I can only speak to capitalism because I live in the United States. I can't speak to other systems, but for us, it's a lot about materialism and what you need to have to fit in. And really, there's also just in family. So by the time you're adult, you have actually spent more time figuring out how to fit in and get approval than you have figuring out who you are.
Oh, that's so true.
Yeah.
I think it's interesting because, well, let me tell you about my generation, right? We have this saying, keep up with the Joneses, which is your neighbor. You got to keep, if they get this car, you got to get this car to stay
Mhm.
fit in the neighborhood. And I thought a lot about this. And I remember, I don't know if it's the entitlement, but it's like that capitalism. I felt as though I made the middle class, right? Upper middle class because of my salary range, whatever. Then I thought, oh, this means I should buy this type of car
Yeah.
or this type of groceries. I should never buy store brand because I don't want people to know that I'm buying store brand. Well, that was before. Now I do buy store brand. So let's just be clear because it's just the same. But it's very interesting to me how I got caught up in that capitalism, like these things about fitting in and making sure we had the right whatever. I
Yeah.
thought that was what was interesting. Even a Mr. When I was, because I'm a main breadwinner and my daughter was an only child. And that whole thing about being a working mom, even though dad was at home as Mr. Mom, though he would hate if I called him Mr. Mom. So again, I hope he doesn't watch this, but he will. But my point of it is that there's this little bit of the guilt of working that I actually bought her all these things that she really didn't need. That's a little bit of people pleasing, guilt, and all this other stuff. But what's interesting to me again is feeling like I could do certain things because I wanted to fit in as a good mother. To me, that was fitting in as a good mother, that I would provide her everything that she wants. So that was what was interesting too. So I had no
Well, and
boundaries. I had no financial boundaries. So that was
this links really nicely into the next segment, which is about, so what does this mean in terms of boundaries? So what you just heard Karen give an example of is when our focus is on fitting in, boundaries go out the window. So she just gave an example of financial boundaries, but think about interpersonal boundaries. So as we mentioned in our episode about boundaries, and if you haven't watched that, I'm going to put the link below. Boundaries aren't walls. I want you to think of boundaries as I boundaries or identity boundaries. So a boundary is what defines and identifies you as distinct from other. And it's made up of your values, your preferences, what your strengths are, what your core beliefs are. And when you have that sense of those boundaries, you're able to identify that first leg of a boundary stool, which is knowing what's okay and what's not okay. And
For
you
you.
have for you.
Mhm.
And when you're engaging in fitting in, you're not thinking anymore about what's okay for you and what's not okay for you. You're thinking about what's okay
For
for
them.
other, what's okay for them, what's not okay for them. Then that drives the actions that you take. And it's sort of an amnesia. You have to repress or put aside what your boundaries and preferences and even your values. You may even put your values aside in order to fit in. So fitting in is like acid to boundaries. And this can happen in the workplace where you maybe want to fit in and be seen as a team player. And so you're, agreeing to take on other people's stuff. And if a lot of you might have remembered during the Me Too movement and the Weinstein, a lot of women talked about the pressure they felt for their career. And this was the culture. And there's a lot of cocktail parties. And so you have to drink to be with the boys club. And then getting in a horrible situation. And people say, well, why didn't you just quit? Why didn't you just quit? It's like, you're doing all these things and you're putting aside your boundaries and you're taking these risks because you're trying to fit in to be successful in the environment and in the group that you're in.
And it's because that's what is defined as successful. Because when you ask with other people, this is a problem. When you have so many people doing it, you're asking and understanding how other people are doing it, so you think it's okay, right? So that's where I got some of my feedback from other people. And so, like, even in the work example place for me, now this is, remember, I'm 60 years old, so this is what is interesting. So I don't think this is the case right now where like the outfits. I remember I would watch what other people wear. When we were talking, I realized that my mom always made me buy Brook Brothers suits. And I don't even know why Brook Brothers suits, because they hardly have any women's suits.
Oh,
Different, they're black, and because they're made off the men's suits, right? So it's really a men. Brooks Brothers really a men's store. And I remember wearing that flower little, like, it's like a tie, but it was a flower tie type of thing. It looked like a little flower. I remember I hated it. But my mom, who bought me first outfit, and then I got trained, like, no, Karen, this is what you do. The Dress for Success book was really big. My mom gave me to that. Everything was just for success. And so just thinking about that, where what you wore or what you would say and what you wouldn't say. And I was always reading books, that allow me to know how to quote unquote be.
well, and maybe in comparison to that, with my own experience, not having the wiring to be able to observe those social
Yeah.
norms or even understand like what a book on Dress for Success was, I had shared with Karen that I also had one of my first jobs was at a big consulting firm, one, I think the big five consulting firms. And I was just out of college, maybe 2 years out of college. I didn't have a lot of money. I think I had one dress and one suit that I got at a discount store. And so I walked into the orientation day and I actually burst out laughing. And I was a little bit late. So I was the last person to come. And it was all men. And they all had on the same charcoal gray suit, white
Right.
shirt, and burgundy red tie.
Yeah, it's like
And I I just I started laughing.
like corporate America,
Yeah,
exactly.
I just all that went through my head was, "Oh, I guess I didn't get the memo." And I shook my head, and I was like, "Everybody," I'm thinking, "Everybody looks exactly the same. That seems weird." Like, "Oh." And I took my
Wow.
seat, And it never went through my head. I saw how people dress. I moved from California to Virginia and was very conservative and, almost, what my supervisor would always wear almost ankle length skirts. I was like,
Yeah.
whoa, suit jacket all. And I kept thinking well, they don't pay me enough to be able to afford to dress that way. So this is what I'm
So let
like,
me tell you.
I'm pragmatic. It doesn't occur to me to think about what I need to do. I was like, I can't afford that. Move
Yeah.
on.
So what's interesting when I was doing consulting work, right, is that this is my client, and we did a team building. This was like, I think, my second year as a consultant, and we did this team building. It was a golf outing. I play golf, but not that well. Like, I remember I did everything I know my mom taught me to, which is one, I went for a 4 hour. I didn't have the money, but I paid for 4 hour coaching session so I would look better and that I wouldn't miss the ball and stuff. So I did that. So that was one thing. Two, I went and got a new outfit that matched, and I had the shoes already. And then, of course, because I traveled, they actually gave me the ping golf clubs. So I was trying to look like I knew how to play, which I did know how to hit the ball. I knew how to play. I knew the rules and all this. And they thought I was a ringer, that they even made me play off the men's tees as a woman. I was the only woman. So they didn't want me to have any advantage. So me play off the men's tees
Wait,
instead of the women's tees
why did they think you're a ringer?
because of what I wore.
Oh,
Because I wore the ping, the clothes, and I knew the golf language and all this other stuff. And the way that I acted very confident because I wanted to fit
oh,
in,
oh.
right? Because I'm a consultant to them. Man, did I learn, man, that really made me starting to realize that really hurt me by pretending that I'm a golfer when I'm not really, right? It's so easy to pretend. Anyways, that was a coaching
Karen,
thing.
that reminds me of, like, so one of my colleagues was like, we have to learn how to play golf.
I'm like,
And
no way.
they took me to the golf course, right? And I have no idea that I'm like, oh, this is like croquet, because the ball never went in the air. And then it would roll and hit the sidewalk and then roll really far. And I'd be like, oh, that worked really well. And they're like, okay, no, Christina, that's not how you play.
That's why I took up golf, because I thought I was supposed to. Exactly. And I did it. Christina did not. See
Yeah.
the difference
Yeah.
in
Well,
all right.
and here's another example too. So I was a consultant in another company, and the client loved to play golf. And the colleague who told me, oh, we have to learn how to play golf, was trying to explain to me they're still doing work when they go and play golf. And if you're not playing golf, then you're not part of the conversation. And so you have to go, well, this client was a jerk. He was mean, and he treated us badly, and he was a chain smoker, and he's always waving his cigarette in our face, and he would chew us out. And so one night, first of all, I'm not going to go freaking play golf. And then we had a sort of a town hall meeting. We had worked really hard. And so everybody was going to go to the bar. And I'm like, I'm going back to my room. And he's like, oh, Christiana, like, no, you got to come with us. Right now, I think people are fitting in would go. But me not having
I
no
would do
worry.
that. I would just,
Yeah.
because everybody else was going. I'm so tired, but
Yeah.
I
And I
can't
went,
do it.
I'm not going. I said, I'm not going. And I don't need to be around you waving your cigarette in my face. And I was like, you seem to forget that we're here supporting you and you treat us like crap. And I'm not going anywhere with you. And
What happened?
he was so shocked. And it turned out he was actually very appreciative of people who were truthful. And so it just totally
He
changed his
appreciated it. Yeah.
attitude. He was so
Yeah.
appreciative. He was much nicer to me. If he saw me, he put his cigarette out and he would move the smoke
Wow.
away. And he would say, Christina, please join. He would say, please, would you please join us? And I was just a low level, entry level consultant. But I just,
But
again,
he
not
respected you because I think that's the whole point. What I love about your story for this one is that we assumed they were going to get kicked out or the client's
Mhm.
going to hate us, but it was actually opposite because they were respectful that we could hold our own, right? And we would tell the truth,
It's
right?
telling
In
the
some ways,
truth.
it's the telling the truth
Telling
and
the
being who
truth.
you are and telling your truth, sharing your perspective. And that's what they value in today's world, and that's what it is. Even that world back then, because people valued truthfulness and trust, right? And
They
that's how
do.
you build trust. That's cool.
Yeah,
So
I think that's absolutely kind of the message. And I want to just touch again. So, if integrity and telling the truth and becoming trusted are the benefits of choosing more to be authentic and to have your boundaries, the consequences of not, there are mental health consequences of
yeah.
constantly trying to meet others' expectations. It can create all kinds of stress and anxiety because you're spending a lot of time scanning the environment. And when you're actually in scan mode, you have to understand neurologically, you are actually sending a signal to your brain that there is a threat. There is a threat somewhere, and it elevates your sympathetic arousal and keeps you in this low grade of anxiety all the time. And then after a while, you will burn out at being at that
Mhm.
level of anxiety and then drop into an exhausted depression. And
And yeah, but I also think what you said was fitting in is about the fear.
yes.
Fear that you have. And for me, my fitting is was always about fear of being alone.
Mhm.
Not lonely, but really being alone.
Well,
So
and yeah, but the thing is that what most people who have done masking for a really long time will tell you, they don't feel that they belong. They feel profoundly lonely because their true self has been kept hidden.
oh
Their
yeah, for
true
so long.
self hasn't been connecting with anybody. And
Yeah.
so deep down is a profound sense of loneliness. Even though you can, so many people I've heard say, I can be in a crowd and feel lonely. And that's what happens when
Mhm.
you don't feel that you can be yourself. And then there's also impacts on relationships. It's the effort to fit in is you can lose your sense of integrity if you're having different groups and you're going to be this way to be with this group, but then you're this way to be with another, and then you're this way to be with another group. No matter who you are, you're always putting on the mask for that group.
Yeah, almost like a chameleon that I was talking
Yeah.
about earlier. You're never chameleon or an actor, and it's that's tiring.
It's tiring, and if like, I live in a small community, so if people are like, "Wait, Sally said that? She doesn't believe that. I thought she thinks," you know,
Yeah.
you're sort of flip-flopping and inconsistently is ultimately then you start to lose your integrity, people don't trust you, now you're not trusted. It can almost be self-fulfilling. The fear of being tossed out causes behaviors that can increase the risk of being tossed out.
Yeah, you might be in the inner circle, no, but you're not in the inner circle. You're kind of like on the
Yes.
border because they start to see that you're not really them. So that's
Yeah.
part of being tossed out.
Absolutely. And then, as we said, in imposter syndrome, when you're spending a lot of time masking and shoving down your own beliefs, your own values, repressing your own feelings, that can affect your self esteem. You can even lose your sense of self because you're masking all the time. And if you're, say, again, in a minority group in this country, LGBTQ plus, and you say you're in a really conservative community where it isn't safe, this is where you see a lot of depression and suicidality in this community because the
Mhm.
weight of not being able to be authentic, not being free, because you're not free. That's the whole thing. As an existentially oriented therapist, one of our focuses and that I do with clients is how do we find that courage to be free? Because when you're masking, when you're focusing entirely on fitting in, when you're repressing so many parts of yourself, you're not free. You're the warden in your own jail.
Yeah.
Sometimes in situations, but also, we have to understand how we do it to ourselves.
And I think that's where even as coaches, like we don't deal with the past. We stay more forward on from here on and giving you different, things to think about and pause and things like that. Where is that discomfort about? Because sometimes we don't know until we pause. But
Mm,
this world is so rapid that we don't always pause. And we think pause is like a long pause, like I have to take a break. But it's just to notice. And noticing is just like that. If you just change the lens to notice a little bit differently.
That's a
Oh,
great segue into
oh,
some
I was just going to
strategies.
move us. That's
Yes.
perfect. Okay, go.
To just build on Karen's describing awareness, the pause so that you can have awareness. Committing to a path of self-awareness is one of the foundational skills because then one is where you figure out what your own values are and you become aware of what's the choice I'm making in the moment, to bring that ability to notice what's going on. And you have to know what those values are, your own core values, your own core beliefs, because that's where boundaries spring from. It springs from your values. Your boundaries support the values. They're there to protect the values. So you have to know what those values are. And then I mentioned you have to have this existential courage, because to cultivate the ability to stand in the discomfort of being different from the group so that you can just be your unique self, to be that individual and authentic person you are meant to be, you do have to sit with the discomfort of the fear. What does this mean to be alone? I mean, it's easy for me because I'm an introvert, and being on autistic spectrum, someone who didn't learn masking, I had no choice. But I'm an introvert, so I don't have to have a lot of affiliation, and I'm going to be okay.
But for
But if you're
me,
if you're social,
like
you're a social
me,
extrovert, it's much harder.
yeah, I totally agree with that. But I also want to differentiate. Let me just slow down for a bit, because I think this is a word that I always had a problem with, but now I get it now. Extension. Can't say
Exis-
it though. I get it though.
Existential.
Courage, right? To differentiate that from courage, it's like a very deepness in courage. And I think that's where it like dwells from within you. Like I believe there's this
Existential.
yes, that word courage that's way deep in you. And when you're able to take it from there, it's like all of a sudden you need to do it. That's how I'm describing it. But is there a better way to describe it?
So, existential, think of the word existence. So this is about the courage that is related to being. So the courage to be is another way to say existential courage, is the courage to be, the courage to exist authentically is what that means, existential courage. And Karen is right. It's courage comes from the word heart. It's the ability to have heart and to act in the face of fear. And this is in the service of being your authentic self. Courage is just a fundamental thing to cultivate in life, because there's many times if you're going to have boundaries, you just cannot have boundaries without courage. So whatever you need to do to cultivate courage, there are many different paths that you can take. I always recommend doing it incrementally. If this is going to be new for you, start with the people closest to you. Share something that you have kept hidden, because I think you need to have the experiences like I've had, not knowing anybody better. I just speak my truth, and I've never been thrown out of the cave. And like, no, I won't say never been thrown out of the cave, but the caves I've been thrown out of were not caves I wanted to be in. So
That's an important point. Yeah,
yes.
that's an important point. Yeah.
Yeah, but
It's
any
so
cave
interesting.
worth
Yeah.
being in
No,
did
I
not talk
totally agree
out.
with you. Yeah. Yeah. I totally agree with you, because I think you don't know until you're thrown out, and then you realize I just never fit in. It was just so funny how I became the chameleon, just because that fear was so deep within me. I didn't even know I was doing it. So another thing I want to bring up that we were talking about, it was about faith, right? And I feel like when we're talking about that aloneness and stuff, I feel like my faith as a Christian, or probably other people who believe in the universe, I never felt as though I would be alone, because when I became a Christian who believed in the personal relationship with God and Jesus Christ, it made me know that I was not ever alone. I believed in the footprints. I didn't, for the longest time, I did not understand the footprints. Like I understood that he
You're
would
talking
lead
about
me.
the poem, The Footprints in
Oh,
the
the footprints.
Sand.
Thank you. This is why you're good for me. So yeah, and how it's like 4 feet, and then all of a sudden, 2 feet,
So
right?
the poem is that I'm walking on the beach,
Oh.
and there's two sets of prints, and then
All of a
when
sudden,
I'm
there's one.
walking with God, and there's two sets of prints, and suddenly there's only one set of prints, and the person's like, God, why did you abandon me at my worst time? And the poem is that I didn't abandon you. That's where I carried you.
Exactly. And so I think this is where, for me, once I started to realize that was where my deeper faith come in. So that's my whole point, where I feel as though faith can help you. And even though for people for you who does not believe in what I believe, tell me a little bit about that, how that worked for you.
Well, again, I think there was a long time where thank goodness, again, being an introvert, I don't feel alone because there's so much that goes on in my own. I can sit there and stare off into space and entertain myself, like be quite happy. So I for a long time that wasn't an issue. But then I had a dark night of the soul for about 5 years, and I struggled with major depression, and I had a whole bunch of really bad things. I've mentioned some of them in other
Mhm.
podcasts, a lot of really terrible things that had happened to me. And at that time was feeling like am I just having a big cloud over me? Like it's, but yeah, to get me just really feeling alone. And Karen saw that I was struggling, and she is of faith, and she would say to me, like, Christina, you keep trying to do it on your own. You need to let go, let God. I'm like, I don't
And
even know
she's
what
not
that
a
means.
person of faith. So
I don't know what that meant. My best friend is Catholic. Same, get the same message from her. You're doing it all on your own. You need to let go. You need to trust God. I'm like, do you guys understand what it means to be a heathen? Like, I don't understand what you're talking about. And so one day, it was just a really dark day, and I just got to the end of my rope, and I just said, okay, fine. I don't even know what this means. I said, oh, you take it. I can't do it anymore. Like I was gonna let go to whatever this thing in the universe was. I was just take it. And I kid you not, I just had this weird feeling of being caught. Like caught.
wow.
And I remember being so confused.
I know, because you're not used to it.
Because what I thought was going to happen I was going to let go of that. It's hanging by my fingernails. I was going to let go and just drop into oblivion. And then I was caught. And I lay there in my bed going, what just happened? Like, oh darn, they were right. And so ever since then, like I still don't follow any religion. If anything, the closest is Unitarian Universalists, which are a bunch of, like recovering religious people or atheists and agnostics. But I do have a strong sense of something, of
Yeah.
spirit that is there. And I'm a show me kind of person. So I'm a skeptic until I experience something. And so that was such a powerful experience that, and really until that point, even though I was already comfortable being alone, it's in the hard moments that I know what Karen talks about now when she talks about faith, that I understand what she's saying now, and really I have to thank you for that because you kept telling me, Christina, let go, let God. Like, you don't know what you're talking about.
Yeah. So those Christians, remember, when you just say it, you don't have to pretend and not say it. Just say it and just see what happens and let it happen, right? So, anyways, we have to end up soon. So there's a clear and unambiguous and self trust. You want to take the be clear and unambiguous? What do you mean by
Well,
that?
in terms of when you're starting to work on these strengthening your boundaries, one of the things that, again, Brene Brown talks about is clear is kind and unclear is unkind. So
I love.
you need to know where those red lines are for you and your eye boundaries and be ready to act on what's in your control. And if the way that you can get there is by recognizing that that is actually the kind act to do,
To
and that
others, for others,
for others
and for
is
yourself.
kind, that might help you deal with the fear of, oh, I might upset people if I have some boundary, I might upset them. It's clear, it's kind, unclear, it's unkind.
And the self trust for me, again, it's like the whole thing is to ask yourself, do I really want to fit into this group? Like, if I feel so much discomfort every time I go to this group or how they act with other people, like, it's not even being with this group. Sometimes it's when this group is out, am I embarrassed by being with this group?
Mm,
That to me was where, okay, that's something is telling me, but I'm not picking up because I so much want to be part of a group.
yeah.
And so I think that's making a commitment to yourself that it's not the right group for you. And you'll find the right group because we are a community and you'll find the right people. Like, it doesn't have to be everybody in that group, it could be one or
Mhm.
two in that group that you end up with. All right. So let's conclude.
Yeah, so we've gone over that the urge to fit in is in general innate in being a human being because we're wired to seek connection and belonging to a group in order to survive and be safe and to meet our social needs because we're social beings. But when this is done at the expense of your own sense of self, your authenticity, then can be a really devastating cost to your mental health and your well-being. Learning to be aware of, am I in the habit of fitting in? Are my choices coming out of fear? Or
That's
are
the
my
big one.
choices coming out of I'm wanting to belong because I feel a simpatico, a resonance. This aligns with my value. These are my people. Then you don't even have to try to fit in. You just do fit in. You
Yeah,
just do
you're just
have those
being.
people
You're
on.
just
You just
being.
be.
I always think about the whole difference between being and doing. You're just being. You're not
Yeah,
doing things to fit in. You're actually
yeah.
just being. And
There
that's
you
the
go.
big difference.
So
So,
be giving you the practices, self-awareness, clarifying your values, learning to be clear about your boundaries. If you're a person of faith, deepening that faith so you have that personal connection and know that you're never alone, and then acting in integrity with yourself to build your self-trust. These are some steps you can start taking to address the impact that seeking fitting in has on your intention to have healthier interpersonal boundaries.
I love this stuff that we're doing because it always makes me always think of other nuances I need to build, some other skills I need to build. I still every once in a while fit in, want to fit in, right? And then
Mhm.
just becoming aware again. So let's all thank our listeners again. Thank you for tuning in. We really, really want to appreciate you. And we really get excited when we see the people who are thumbing up or downloading or subscribing. We want to thank you for that. And, forward to other people that that would be or struggling with this fitting in to just to think about it and then discuss it over coffee or on a Facebook or something. That's part of it as well.
Yeah, and then also you can email us at simplyhuman.connect@gmail.com because we're starting to get requests, and we love that because it allows us to create content that's meaningful to you. So you can either put it in the comments below or you can email us, and we will integrate it into our upcoming future titles because we want this to really serve and be of benefit to you. So thank you again for tuning in. We really appreciate it and have a fantastic week. Bye, everybody.
Bye, everybody.